Enjoy, rancher. She bites, the Apache trader said, but the rancher didn't buy her to save himself. The sun had barely risen over the wide, open plains, casting a golden glow over the ranch. Dust rose gently in the morning air as the rancher moved among his cattle, checking each one with care. His hands were strong from years of hard work, his face weathered by sun and wind, but his eyes were sharp, noticing even the smallest changes in the herd. Life on the ranch was not easy, but it was predictable, steady, and satisfying in its own way. Every day had its rhythm, from feeding the cattle at dawn to checking the fences that lined the vast property, to riding the dusty trails in the late afternoon. On this morning, a sense of unusual excitement rippled through the small town nearby. News had spread that an Apache trader had arrived with a group of animals for sale. Among them were horses, fine and rare, each one with its own story. But one horse in particular drew more attention than the rest. Small, strong, and clearly untamed, she was unlike anything anyone had ever seen in these parts. Her coat was a deep chestnut, gleaming in the sun, and her eyes were sharp and intelligent, reflecting a spirit that could not be easily contained. The rancher watched from a distance as the trader, a tall man with a confident gait and sharp eyes, called out to the crowd that had gathered around his makeshift pen. "Step closer and see for yourselves," he said, a hint of amusement in his voice. "Enjoy, rancher." "She bites," he added, glancing directly at the rancher who had just arrived to see what all the fuss was about. The crowd laughed at the warning. To them it seemed like a joke, a playful way to build excitement. But the rancher knew better. He had seen animals like this before, and he knew that such warnings were never entirely without reason. He took a careful step forward, his boots crunching on the dry dirt, and studied the horse more closely. She moved with purpose, her muscles taut and ready to spring. She tossed her head, shaking her mane, and fixed the rancher with a sharp, evaluating stare. The rancher was not the type to back down from a challenge. He had faced wild storms, broken fences, and stubborn cattle that refused to move, but there was something about this horse that intrigued him. She was not just wild. She was intelligent, cautious, and fiercely independent. Most people might see that as a problem, something to avoid, but the rancher saw it differently. He saw potential. He saw a challenge worth taking, a spirit that could match his own in stubbornness and determination. The trader stepped closer, smiling at the rancher's interest. "She's not for the faint-hearted," he said, running a hand along the horse's neck. "Many have tried to tame her, few have succeeded, some leave with scratches and bites to remember her by. Are you sure you want to try?" The rancher nodded slowly, thinking about the long hours he had spent learning to read animals, to understand them, and to earn their trust. He had always believed that force and dominance were the easiest way to manage animals. But he had also learned that patience, respect, and observation often produced the best results. This horse, he realized, would not respond to commands shouted over the wind or a whip cracked in frustration. She would respond to understanding, to calm determination, to someone who respected her strength. With that thought in mind, he approached the pen. The horse backed away slightly, ears pricked and nostrils flaring. She tested his movements carefully, following his steps with watchful eyes. The rancher crouched slightly, lowering his profile, showing her that he was not a threat. He spoke in a soft, steady voice, letting her hear the calm tones in his words. Slowly, cautiously, she stepped closer, her movements deliberate and precise. The trader watched this interaction with a knowing smile. "I see you're not like the others," he said quietly. "Most men would push, pull, or try to dominate her. You're observing, waiting, that's smart. That's the only way she'll come to you willingly." The rancher did not respond. He knew the moment required patience, not words. He studied her carefully, noticing the subtle movements in her ears, the tension in her shoulders, and the flick of her tail. Every gesture was a signal, and he had learned to read them all. Animals spoke through actions, and he was fluent in their language. Minutes passed as the two measured each other, neither one fully giving in. The crowd around them began to lose interest, some moving on to look at the other horses, but the rancher remained focused. He felt a connection forming, quiet but undeniable. This was not just a transaction, not just a purchase. This was the beginning of a partnership, one that would demand effort, understanding, and mutual respect. Finally, the rancher stepped closer and reached out a hand, letting her sniff it. She hesitated for a moment, then nipped lightly at his sleeve. It was not aggression, he realized, but a test, a small bite to see how he would react. He laughed quietly to himself and did not pull back. Instead, he remained calm, steady, and patient. The horse blinked, her eyes softening ever so slightly. The trader's eyes twinkled with amusement. "See, she's testing you. Most would have yanked their hand back or shouted at her. You didn't. That's why she's coming to you." The rancher nodded, feeling a surge of anticipation. He could sense that this horse was different from any he had ever encountered. She was wild, yes, but she was also intelligent, strong, and aware. She had survived in a world that demanded toughness and instinct, and she had emerged unbroken. He respected that, and he knew that respect would be the foundation of any bond they might form. After a few more careful exchanges, the rancher made his decision. He would buy her. Not to prove anything, not to save himself from some imagined danger, but because he saw something in her that mirrored his own values: resilience, intelligence, and spirit. The transaction was simple, but the weight of it was not. He knew that taming a horse like this would take time, patience, and skill. It would not be easy, and there would be days of frustration, fear, and challenge. But the reward, the partnership, the trust, the bond would be worth it. The rancher led the horse from the pen, her hooves clattering softly on the dry ground. She tested him with little jabs and playful bites along the way, reminding him of her independent nature. He smiled, feeling a sense of excitement he hadn't felt in years. This was no ordinary horse, and this was no ordinary day. As they reached the ranch, the horse's alert eyes scanned the new environment. She sniffed at the fence posts, pawed at the ground, and tossed her head in curiosity. The rancher gave her space to explore, letting her understand the boundaries of her new home. He knew that rushing her, forcing her, or trying to dominate her spirit would only push her away. Patience and observation would be their guiding principles. By the end of the day, the horse had begun to settle slightly, though her sharp eyes remained watchful. The rancher set up her stall, filled with fresh hay and water, and spoke softly to her as he worked. Even in her wildness, she seemed to understand that he was not an enemy, not a threat, but a partner willing to earn her trust. The sun set over the plains, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. The rancher stepped back to admire the horse as she moved gracefully around the pen, her coat shining in the evening light. He felt a quiet sense of accomplishment, not for himself, but for the promise of what lay ahead. This was the beginning of a journey that would test his patience, skill, and understanding, but it was also the start of a bond that could change both their lives forever. That night, as the rancher watched the stars appear over the quiet ranch, he reflected on the trader's words. "Enjoy, rancher, she bites." He smiled to himself, realizing that the bite was not a warning of danger, but a reminder of the horse's strength, intelligence, and spirit. And he knew, deep in his heart, that he had bought her not to save himself, but to honor that spirit, to nurture it, and to form a partnership built on trust, patience, and respect. As the night grew deeper, both rancher and horse rested, each in their own space, yet connected by an unspoken understanding. The journey ahead would be challenging, filled with tests of courage, patience, and trust. But for the first time in a long while, the rancher felt a sense of excitement for the unknown, a sense that something extraordinary was about to unfold. The story of a rancher and his wild, untamed horse had begun, not with force or domination, but with observation, respect, and the quiet understanding that some bonds are earned, not claimed. And so, under the calm night sky, the first chapter of their journey closed, leaving both man and horse poised for the adventures, challenges, and life-changing experiences that lay ahead. The morning sun spilled over the ranch once again, painting the fences and the fields in warm gold. The rancher stepped outside, his boots crunching softly on the dry dirt. His eyes immediately searched for the chestnut horse he had brought home the day before. She was in her stall, alert and tense, her ears twitching at every sound. She had spent her first night cautiously observing her new surroundings, and now, as the rancher approached, she lifted her head and fixed him with sharp, calculating eyes. The rancher stopped a few feet away and spoke softly. "Good morning," he said. His voice was steady, calm, and patient, the same voice he had used the day before. The horse flicked her tail, and a soft whinny escaped her lips. She was still cautious, still wary, but she was also curious. He opened the stall slowly, stepping back to give her space. The chestnut horse did not move at first. She sniffed the air, her nostrils flaring as she tried to read the scent of this new human who had come into her life. The rancher knelt slightly, extending a hand slowly. "It's okay," he said. "I'm not here to hurt you." She hesitated, then took a tentative step forward, sniffing his hand before withdrawing slightly. A soft whicker escaped her, almost as if she was testing him. The rancher smiled quietly to himself. "We'll take this slowly," he said. "No rush. We'll learn each other's ways." He knew that the horse's biting and nipping had not been aggression. It had been a way of asserting herself, a test of patience and understanding. Most people would see her defiance and respond with frustration or force, but the rancher had learned long ago that trust could never be forced. It had to be earned. Over the next several days, the rancher devoted himself to understanding her. He observed when she was most comfortable, when she became anxious, and what seemed to calm her. He noticed that she flinched at sudden movements and loud noises, but she relaxed when he spoke softly and moved deliberately. He realized that rushing her or trying to dominate her would only push her away. Patience, respect, and consistency were the keys. He started with small gestures. Every morning he would bring her fresh water and the choicest hay. He would speak to her as he worked around the ranch, letting her hear his voice even when he was busy with other tasks. Sometimes he would simply sit near her, watching the horizon, letting her come closer on her own terms. Slowly she began to trust that his presence was not a threat. One afternoon he brought a brush and approached her stall. "Let's try this," he said softly. The horse lifted her head, watching him carefully, her muscles tense. The rancher brushed her gently, starting with her neck, avoiding areas where she seemed uncomfortable. She shifted slightly, not moving away, and for the first time allowed his touch without snapping or nipping. "Good girl," he whispered, smiling. "See, it's not so bad." It was a small victory, but in his mind it was significant. Every tiny step forward was a building block of trust. He could see her personality emerging, the same stubborn, intelligent spirit that had first caught his attention. She was not a horse that would submit blindly. She was a partner to be understood, a companion to be respected. The rancher also realized that he needed to mirror her energy at times. When she was restless, he moved with her, keeping his tone calm but steady. When she was cautious, he slowed down, giving her time to assess the situation. Slowly, a rhythm developed between them, an unspoken communication that required no words. She responded to his movements, and he responded to hers, each learning from the other. One morning, a small challenge tested their growing bond. A sudden gust of wind swept across the plains, rattling the fences and stirring the loose hay in the barn. The horse flinched and bolted slightly, her muscles tense and ready to flee. The rancher remained calm, speaking in gentle tones, his hands open and steady. "It's okay," he said. "Nothing is going to hurt you." For a long moment she remained frozen, her eyes wide and alert. Then slowly she turned back toward him. He stepped forward carefully, extending a hand. She sniffed it, hesitated, and then nuzzled it lightly. The rancher let out a quiet laugh. "See, you're stronger than the wind, just like I thought." That afternoon he took her to the open pasture, letting her run freely. At first she was hesitant, testing the boundaries of the space. But gradually she began to gallop, tossing her mane and stretching her legs. The rancher followed on foot, careful not to crowd her, letting her discover the open land at her own pace. As the days passed, the rancher introduced more exercises. He encouraged her to follow him through simple obstacles, small logs, gentle inclines, and narrow paths. Each time she met the challenge with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Sometimes she would bite gently when frustrated, reminding him of her wild nature. Each time he remained calm, never pulling away, never showing anger. Their bond deepened not just through training, but through shared moments of quiet observation. They would watch sunsets together, the rancher leaning against a fence while she grazed nearby. He would speak softly about his day, his thoughts, and even his memories, though she could not understand the words. The tone of his voice mattered more than the words themselves, and she seemed to respond to his calm presence and steady rhythm. One evening, a young calf became stuck in a fence, its cries echoing across the pasture. The rancher rushed to help, and the horse followed closely, her ears pricked and her body tense. She stayed close but calm, sensing the rancher's need and the urgency of the situation. Together they freed the calf, the horse moving with intelligence and instinct, not panic. The rancher realized that she was not just wild. She was smart, brave, and capable of acting in ways that surprised even him. Word of the horse's temperament and the rancher's patient approach began to spread. Neighbors and townspeople came to watch from a distance, curious to see whether the untamable horse would accept the rancher. Some were skeptical, shaking their heads and muttering that no one could ever control her. Others began to admire the quiet dedication, seeing that the bond between human and animal was not about dominance, but respect. Over the weeks, small milestones marked their progress. She allowed the rancher to brush her all over, to lead her with a halter, and eventually, to touch her legs and hooves without resistance. She began to follow him willingly through the pasture, her steps in sync with his. Every success was celebrated quietly, with a nod, a soft word, or a gentle pat. The rancher understood that each moment of trust was fragile, and he never rushed or forced her. One crisp morning, he decided to attempt something new. He led her to a small corral and gently encouraged her to step inside. At first, she hesitated, shifting nervously from hoof to hoof. He spoke softly, moving slowly, giving her space to choose. After a tense moment, she stepped forward, not with fear, but with cautious curiosity. The rancher smiled quietly, knowing that this step represented more than just entering a corral. It represented a growing confidence in him, a willingness to trust that he was not a threat. As the sun climbed higher, the rancher led her through simple exercises, walking, stopping, turning, and following his gentle guidance. She responded with intelligence and awareness, sometimes testing him with a soft bite or a playful nip, reminding him of her independence. But he did not react with frustration. He mirrored her energy, stayed calm, and continued to encourage her with patience and steady words. By the end of the day, a noticeable change had occurred. She no longer flinched at his presence. She walked beside him willingly, her movements relaxed, and her eyes held a new softness, a sign that trust was growing. The rancher knew this was only the beginning. Many challenges still lay ahead, but he also knew that the bond they were forming would last, built on mutual respect, patience, and understanding. That night, as the rancher tended to other chores, he glanced at the horse resting in her stall. She lifted her head briefly, her eyes meeting his. There was no fear, no tension, only a quiet acknowledgement of the bond they had begun to forge. He whispered softly, "We're learning together, and I promise you'll never be forced into anything you're not ready for." He left her stall with a sense of satisfaction and anticipation. Tomorrow would bring new lessons, new challenges, and new steps forward, but for now, he was content. The first days of earning her trust had been successful, marked by patience, observation, and small victories that would form the foundation of a lifelong partnership. In the quiet of the ranch, with the stars beginning to twinkle overhead, the rancher felt a sense of purpose and hope. This horse, fierce and intelligent, was no longer just a challenge. She was a companion, a reflection of resilience and spirit. Together, they would face the trials and triumphs that lay ahead, each learning from the other, each earning trust and understanding one day at a time. The story of the rancher and the horse continued, not through force or domination, but through patience, empathy, and the quiet work of building trust. And as the night deepened, both man and horse rested, knowing that tomorrow would be another step forward in a bond that promised courage, loyalty, and mutual respect. The morning air was crisp, and the rancher could feel the first hints of a storm moving in across the plains. Dark clouds rolled slowly in from the horizon, bringing with them a heavy wind that rustled the grass and stirred the loose hay in the barn. The rancher had learned to read the sky as carefully as he read his animals. He knew that a storm was coming, and he also knew that the herd would need attention, the fences would need checking, and the animals would need guidance to safety. He called out gently to the chestnut horse, now named Sienna, and she lifted her head from the pasture where she had been grazing. She watched him closely, her ears twitching at the rising wind. Though she was still relatively new to the ranch, she had already learned to recognize his voice and respond to his presence. Today, that bond would be tested. The rancher quickly moved to check the northern fence line. A section of it had weakened over time, and the coming storm could easily damage it further, risking the escape of the cattle. Sienna followed him willingly, her hooves kicking up soft dust as they moved across the fields. Her muscles were tense with alertness, her eyes constantly scanning the horizon. She had learned the rancher's calm demeanor, and it had taught her to trust his guidance, even in uncertain situations. As they neared the fence, a sudden crack of thunder echoed across the plains. The horses in the nearby paddock startled, their neighs and whinnies filling the air. Sienna jumped slightly, her body coiled like a spring. The rancher spoke in a soft, steady tone, extending his hand to her. "It's okay, Sienna. Nothing is going to hurt you." She hesitated, then nuzzled his hand lightly, a sign that she trusted him despite the frightening noise. While he inspected the fence, the rancher noticed that one of the calves had wandered too close to a low-lying area that was starting to flood from a sudden downpour. The wind picked up, pushing sheets of rain across the fields, and the calf was in danger of slipping into the mud. The rancher knew he had to act quickly. He called out to Sienna, "We need to help the calf, Sienna. Can you come with me?" Without hesitation, she responded, moving close to his side. It was a moment of instinctual teamwork, a silent understanding that they were partners facing a common challenge. As the rancher approached the calf, the mud made the ground slippery, and he had to move carefully to avoid falling. Sienna mirrored his steps, her hooves firm and balanced as she approached the young animal. The calf panicked at the wind and rain, attempting to bolt but slipping in the mud. The rancher reached out, speaking calmly, guiding the calf toward safer ground. Sienna stepped in behind the calf, using her presence to block its frantic movements without pushing too hard. Her sharpness and awareness kept the calf from thrashing into deeper mud. For several tense minutes, the rancher and Sienna worked together, guiding the calf through the treacherous area. The rain poured down, soaking them both, but neither hesitated. Sienna had learned to respond to his commands, not with fear but with intelligence and instinct. The rancher marveled at her courage. Her strength and sharpness, which had seemed so untamed just weeks before, were now a source of support and protection. Once the calf was safely on firmer ground, the rancher patted Sienna's neck, his voice full of praise. "Good girl, Sienna. You stayed calm even when the calf panicked. You helped us both." She flicked her ears, her chest rising and falling with a gentle whinny. The rancher smiled, feeling a surge of pride in their growing partnership. The storm continued to intensify, the wind now howling across the plains. Fences bent and rattled under the pressure, and the rest of the herd huddled together, frightened and restless. The rancher knew that this would be a long and challenging day. He had to protect the herd, secure the fences, and ensure that every animal was safe from harm. Sienna remained close to his side, moving instinctively as he navigated the rain-soaked fields. When a sudden branch fell from a nearby tree, she shifted her weight to block it from hitting the rancher, her instincts sharp and protective. The rancher laughed softly through the rain. "I see you're learning fast, Sienna. You're not just a companion, you're a protector." Hours passed as they moved from one challenge to the next. The rancher repaired weak fence sections while Sienna guided the cattle away from dangerous areas. Together, they worked as a single unit, anticipating each other's moves. It was clear that the bond they had been building through patience and trust was now being tested under real, urgent circumstances. During a brief lull in the storm, the rancher took a moment to catch his breath. Sienna stood beside him, dripping wet but alert, her eyes scanning the field. He reached out to brush her mane gently. "You've done well today," he said softly. "You've shown courage, intelligence, and patience." "I knew you had it in you." She leaned slightly into his hand, her trust and calmness a quiet reward for his dedication. But the storm was not done yet. A flash of lightning struck a nearby tree, sending sparks and splinters flying. The herd panicked, and several cows began to push toward the weak fence again. The rancher's heart raced. He needed to act immediately. Sienna responded instantly, moving between the herd and the fence, nudging the cows back with careful pressure and precise movements. She had learned to read his urgency, to act without hesitation. Together, they guided the animals to the safest part of the pasture, away from the broken fence and the fallen branches. Each step required careful coordination, the rancher's voice calling out commands, his hands directing movement, and Sienna's body providing both control and support. The storm roared around them, but neither faltered. After what felt like hours, the worst of the storm passed. The clouds began to part and the rain softened to a gentle drizzle. The herd had been secured, the fences temporarily reinforced, and the animals were calm once more. The rancher took a deep breath, relief washing over him. He looked at Sienna, her coat drenched and mud-streaked, her eyes shining with intelligence and spirit. "You were amazing, Sienna," he said, his voice full of warmth. "You didn't just follow me, you thought, you acted, you protected. You've grown so much." She responded with a soft nicker, a sound that seemed to carry pride and acknowledgement. The rancher felt a quiet satisfaction, knowing that their bond had deepened not just through training, but through shared experience, through facing real danger together. Word of the rancher and Sienna's teamwork spread through the town quickly. Neighbors and fellow ranchers came to see the horse that had once been considered untamable, now guiding the herd with intelligence and courage. Children watched with wide eyes as Sienna calmly moved around the field, responding to the rancher's voice and gestures. Adults nodded with respect, recognizing that this was no ordinary horse and no ordinary partnership. The rancher, however, remained humble. He knew that the true reward was not admiration but the trust and understanding between himself and Sienna. The storm had tested their patience, their skills, and their connection, but it had also revealed the depth of their partnership. He realized that he had not bought her to save himself from a challenge. He had bought her because he saw potential, intelligence, and spirit. And now, in the face of danger, that potential had been realized. That evening, as the sun set over the wet plains, the rancher led Sienna back to her stall. She shook herself, sending droplets of water flying in every direction, and then settled calmly in the clean hay he had prepared. He knelt beside her, brushing her mane gently. "We faced the storm together," he whispered, "and we succeeded. I couldn't have done it without you." She leaned into his hand, her trust and companionship evident in the softness of her eyes. The rancher stepped back and surveyed the ranch. The fences were battered but standing, the herd was safe, and Sienna rested peacefully. He reflected on the events of the day, realizing that the partnership he had envisioned was now a reality. It had not been built through commands or control, but through patience, understanding, and shared experiences. Sienna had tested him, and he had met her challenges with calmness and respect. Together they had faced the storm, and together they had emerged stronger. As night fell, the rancher lit a small lantern and walked through the barn, checking the animals one last time. Sienna watched from her stall, her eyes following his every movement. He spoke softly, sharing his thoughts and reflections on the day. Though she could not understand his words, she understood his tone, his calm presence, and his care. The story of the rancher and Sienna continued to unfold, now marked by bravery, teamwork, and trust forged in the face of real danger. The challenges of the ranch were many, and storms would come again, but the bond they had built would carry them through. Sienna was no longer just a wild horse. She was a partner, a protector, and a reflection of the rancher's own resilience. And as the ranch settled into quiet night, both man and horse rested, knowing that they had faced something together that neither could have faced alone. The storm had tested them, shaped them, and united them in a way that no ordinary day could. The journey ahead promised more challenges, but also more trust, respect, and shared victories. The rancher looked at Sienna one last time before heading to his own bed. He whispered softly, "Tomorrow, we continue our journey." "Together," Sienna nickered in response, a quiet acknowledgement of the partnership that had been tested and proven. Under the calm, starry sky, both felt a sense of anticipation for what lay ahead, confident that together they could face anything. The storm had passed, but something inside the rancher had changed forever. The fields were still wet from the heavy rain, and the fences showed signs of strain, yet the ranch stood strong. More importantly, the bond between the rancher and Sienna stood even stronger. What began as a simple purchase had become a partnership built on trust, courage, and quiet understanding. In the days that followed, the rancher noticed a new confidence in Sienna. She no longer flinched at every loud sound. She no longer tested him with sharp little nips the way she once had. Instead, she watched him with calm eyes, moving beside him with steady steps. She had learned that he would never force her, never rush her, and never break her spirit. And he had learned that her strength was not something to control, but something to respect. The ranch returned to its normal rhythm. Mornings began with soft sunlight stretching over the plains. The rancher would step outside with his coffee, and Sienna would already be waiting near the fence, ears forward, as if she had been watching for him. He would greet her with a warm smile and a quiet, "Good morning, partner." She would respond with a gentle nicker, her way of saying she was ready for the day. Training continued, but it no longer felt like training. It felt like teamwork. The rancher began guiding her through more advanced tasks around the ranch. She helped move cattle from one pasture to another, walking with calm authority. The other horses seemed to follow her natural leadership. Even the cattle appeared less nervous when she was nearby. Neighbors started to notice. They would stop by the fence and watch as Sienna responded to the rancher's soft commands. There was no pulling, no struggle, just small signals, quiet words, and a shared understanding. Some of the older ranchers would shake their heads in surprise. "That's the same horse the trader warned us about?" one of them asked. The rancher would simply smile. "She was never the problem," he would reply. "She just needed someone to listen." As weeks turned into months, Sienna became more than just a working horse. She became a symbol of what patience and respect could create. The rancher even began bringing her into town for small community events. Children gathered around her, amazed by her calm presence. She stood proudly, allowing gentle hands to brush her coat. The rancher watched carefully, ready to step in if she felt uncomfortable, but she remained steady and kind. One afternoon, the Apache trader returned to town. Word spread quickly, and the rancher decided to ride into town on Sienna. As they approached, heads turned. The chestnut horse moved with grace and confidence, her coat shining under the sun. The trader recognized her immediately, his eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Well," he said with a small laugh, "looks like she's not biting anymore." The rancher dismounted and gently patted Sienna's neck. "She never needed to bite," he said calmly. "She just needed time." The trader stepped closer, observing the horse carefully. Sienna stood tall but relaxed. There was still fire in her eyes, but it was no longer wild and uncertain. It was focused and strong. "You did well with her," the trader admitted. "Most would have tried to break her spirit." The rancher shook his head. "Her spirit is the best part of her." "Why would I break that?" The trader nodded slowly, a look of respect crossing his face. "Seems like you didn't buy her to save yourself from hard work. You bought her because you saw something." "I did," the rancher replied quietly, "and she saw something in me too." That evening, as the rancher rode home, he reflected on how far they had come. The memory of the trader's first words echoed in his mind. "Enjoy, rancher, she bites." At the time, those words sounded like a warning. Now they felt like a challenge, one that had shaped both of them in ways neither expected. Life on the ranch continued to bring small trials. There were long days under the hot sun and early mornings in the cold wind. There were moments when equipment broke down or when cattle wandered too far. But through it all, Sienna remained steady by his side. One late summer afternoon, a group of young ranch hands visited to learn about managing livestock. The rancher used the opportunity to teach them more than just skills. He showed them how he communicated with Sienna, how he waited for her to respond instead of forcing action. "Animals understand more than we think," he told the young workers. "If you respect them, they respect you back." To demonstrate, he stepped into the pasture and called softly for Sienna. She lifted her head and trotted toward him without hesitation. With a simple gesture of his hand, she stopped. With another, she moved forward again. The young ranch hands watched in amazement. "She trusts you completely," one of them said. The rancher smiled. "Trust is built one small moment at a time." As the seasons changed, the rancher noticed something else. Sienna had started watching over the younger horses. If one became nervous, she stood near them, calm and grounded. Her presence alone seemed to steady the others. It was as if she had taken the lessons she learned and passed them forward. The rancher often thought about how different things might have been. If he had reacted with frustration that first day in the pen, if he had pulled his hand back when she tested him, if he had tried to dominate her spirit, none of this would exist. The bond, the trust, the partnership, it all came from one simple choice: patience. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in soft orange and pink, the rancher sat on the fence while Sienna grazed nearby. The air was calm and the ranch felt peaceful. He thought about the storms they had faced, both literal and emotional. "You've taught me more than I taught you," he said softly. Sienna lifted her head and walked toward him. She rested her forehead gently against his shoulder. It was a simple gesture, but it carried deep meaning. It was trust. It was gratitude. It was partnership. Years later, people in town would still talk about the wild horse who came to the ranch and the man who chose patience over pride. The story became something more than just a tale about a horse. It became a lesson about seeing value where others saw trouble, about choosing understanding over control. The rancher never sought fame or recognition. He never entered big competitions or chased awards. His reward was simpler and more meaningful. It was in the quiet mornings when Sienna waited for him. It was in the smooth teamwork as they guided cattle across the fields. It was in the soft nicker she gave whenever he approached. As time moved forward, Sienna grew older, her movements slightly slower but still graceful. The rancher adjusted with her, never pushing beyond her comfort. Their work became lighter, more focused on companionship than labor. They would walk along the edge of the pasture at sunset, side by side without urgency. One particular evening, the sky glowed deep gold and the fields shimmered in the fading light. The rancher stopped walking and looked out over the land he had worked for so many years. Sienna stood beside him, calm and steady. "You were never something to fix," he said quietly. "You were something to understand." Sienna turned her head slightly, her soft eyes meeting his. In that moment, the rancher felt a deep sense of peace. The journey that began with a warning had ended in a legacy of trust. The trader's words had once sounded like a challenge. "Enjoy, rancher, she bites." But now those words felt almost humorous. Yes, she had bitten, she had tested, she had questioned. But she had also taught, protected, and partnered. The rancher did not buy her to save himself from loneliness or to prove something to others. He bought her because he believed in her spirit. And in doing so, he discovered that true strength does not come from control, it comes from connection. As the stars began to appear one by one in the night sky, the rancher and Sienna stood quietly in the field. The wind moved gently through the grass, carrying with it the sound of peaceful stillness. Their story was not loud or dramatic. It was steady, patient, and real. It was built day by day, choice by choice. And as the ranch lights dimmed and the night settled in, the rancher placed his hand gently on Sienna's neck one last time before heading inside. "Thank you," he whispered. Sienna gave a soft, content sound in return. The journey that started with a warning had become a story of respect, a story of courage without force, a story of trust earned slowly and honestly. And under the quiet sky, the rancher knew one simple truth: some bonds are not bought, they are built.